Hello and welcome. Thank you for coming to today's Atticus Advantage webinar. My name is Mike Wells. I'm the moderator in the background. Today's session is SBA loans and your law firm, and it will be handled and facilitated by attorney and Atticus practice advisor Steve Riley. We have a special guest for you that's a national loan lending expert as well. Steve, if you could, just go ahead and get going. I think we have a lot to cover today.
Oh, very good, thanks. So as we go through, if you've got any questions, Mike's going to do his best to monitor the questions, and how you want to ask the questions is just go ahead and raise your hands on the chat function, or pop your question in the chat function, and Mike will do whatever he can to moderate it. Those of you that are on the call probably know about me. I'm one of the partners in Atticus, and my job is to help lawyers take their practices to the next level. And with everything that's going on with the coronavirus, we've been reaching deep into our own client base and bringing out some amazing talent to share their expertise, and that's what today's call is about. So I'm going to encourage you, if you haven't already, and you've got questions, if you haven't already, get a pen or paper out and take any notes that you need to. This session is going to be interactive, so if you've got any questions, don't hesitate to pop them up through the chat function or raise your hand. And our goal really today is to walk you through some of the various options available under the current government program, but more importantly, to highlight and talk about the expertise of our primary guest today. So let me take a moment to introduce Mitch Fogel. Mitch is the founder and managing attorney of Fogel Law Group, and his website's up on the screen for those of you that are following along. And Mitch has just got an extensive, diverse background. He and I were chatting before this about everything from lending, financial transactions, complex commercial matters. I would say Mitch is a business guy doing business work for, for various companies, and has an incredible reputation, expertise in dealing with SBA loans. Now, the great thing about Mitch for us right now is Mitch is part of the Atticus family. So not only is he a fabulous part of the Atticus family, he's a national expert, like many of our clients are. They're national experts. And Mitch is taking time out of what he explains to be being, I guess, Mitch, I think the term you used was being part of a rapid fire machine gun for the past couple of weeks. And Mitch, before we dive in, I just want to take time to make sure we thank you. And I just want to thank you for taking the time to be here, and welcome to the call. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So it's great having you here. So just the current reality, I updated the screen as of about 30 minutes ago. Currently, we have about 20 million workers that are unemployed and applying for jobless benefits. Most states are seeing about 10 times the normal amount of applicants. And states are trying to expand their services for unemployment, and a lot of us as business owners are doing everything we can to keep our current teams employed and keep working with us. And the current legislation has two amazing elements to it. And Mitch, I'm just going to let you do a minute here to compare and contrast. Can you see the screen okay?
Yeah.
All right, great. So could you compare and contrast just for a moment the Paycheck Protection Program against, go ahead, buddy, I'm sorry.
That's okay. They call it the EIDL loan. That's the economic disaster loan. So but first of all, thank you for joining us, everybody, and thank you, Steve and Mike and Atticus for having me on here to help out our fellow Atticus members and those listeners. So yes, I have been dealing with this for the last several weeks. It's been a real challenge because everything keeps changing daily in this program. It's not the program that came out when the CARES Act came out a few weeks ago. It is changing literally every single day. And for those of you that didn't hear it or see it show up on your watch or your phone already, the first $349 billion has already been spoken for. They have run out of those funds. We could talk about that a little bit later, Steve, as to what that means. But to answer your question, both of these programs are generated essentially by the CARES Act. The Paycheck Protection Program, or PPP program, is a program that provides a loan that can be forgiven if certain criteria are met. It is to have employers who qualify receive the funds and to distribute those funds for a variety of things, particularly payroll, but you can also use it for rent, or you can use it for your mortgage payments. And if you qualify and use 75% of that, as your picture shows, then it would be forgiven. To the extent it isn't forgiven, it's payable over 2 years, as you can see on maturity. The first payment is deferred for 6 months. The interest rate is 1%. It's up to $10 million. And so then you would have equal monthly payments over 18 months. Those you have to get through a bank or a credit union or a certified development company, a CDC, or any other kind of lending institution, as opposed to an EIDL loan, which you go directly to the SBA to get. That's different. The interest rate's a little different. It's up to $2 million. You can get a $10,000 advance relative to that very quickly, but just by literally filing the application. Let's see. It's the maturity is 30 years, and the first payments are deferred 1 year. The EIDL, you can get both. One of the questions that nobody really knew the answer to in the first several days of this was, I already applied for an EIDL loan. Can I go get a PPP loan? And the answer is you can. However, to the extent that you get an EIDL loan, especially in advance against that, you need to use your Payment Protection Program loan to pay off part of your EIDL loan. So there's some complexities in there, and you should speak to your lender about that.
Got it.
I could go on and on, but I think you probably don't want me to. We should probably move on to other topics.
No, this is good. And what we're going to do today is really focus on probably the 12 most common questions that you're dealing with, and we're hearing from our clients. So we're just going to walk through those 12 common questions and save some time at the end for anything that people may have that's unique. So I agree with you, Mitch. We'll just move on. So the first question, and these are the 12 most common, who can apply? And I know this is kind of evolving a little bit. I know there's been some recent guidance about partnerships and versus LLCs and things like that. But who can apply? Mitch, who can apply?
Okay, so essentially almost every business in America, starting with that premise, is eligible. And a lot of questions, a lot of answer I'm going to give is going to be in a vacuum where the $349 billion has not been spent yet, and that there is another 250 that's coming. That's another part of our conversation, if you'd like. So everybody would be eligible. That means that, you know, your pizza shop, your law firm, your medical practice, your pharmacist, everybody. Starting with that premise, they did some carve-outs, and they essentially said, if you have more than 500 employees, then you're not eligible. If you are, if you've got a criminal conviction, and there's rules about that, we don't need to get into the granular on that, then you're not eligible. If your business is in certain types of things that the SBA would otherwise not permit unless the act allows you to, it permits it, then you would be ineligible, such as, you know, pornography and things that you would expect. Religious typically wouldn't be, but in this program, certain religious organizations and not-for-profits are eligible. And so that's essentially it. Everybody can get one. So everybody essentially went out and applied. And so you have lenders that have thousands upon thousands of applicants. Some have a few, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40, and some have thousands. And I should also say, because this is something that our audience may have experienced or their clients may have experienced, a lot of lenders initially and still are only doing PPP loans for their own customers, meaning they already bank or borrow from that particular lending institution or credit union, or they've expanded in the last few weeks, some of them, to if you bank personally with ABC Bank, but your business was elsewhere, then they'll open it to you to give you one. And then a few of them initially, much fewer, but then some since then have opened it to outside people entirely. But for a bank to do loans under the program for existing clients, it's a lot easier for them to do loans for clients, borrowers that weren't clients of the bank, because the Bank Secrecy Act, or the BSA, requires banks to go through a whole nother level of due diligence on a borrower that they don't already know. So you're best going and starting your bank.
Yeah, that makes sense. So if you're already banking with the bank, they know you, they're in compliance with most of the laws and regulations. They have a vested interest in making sure that your business is successful. So go to your bank first, and the second tier is go to the bank. If you can't get anything from the bank you have your business with, then go to your personal bank where you do your personal banking, assuming they're different. And then third, you're starting now to see, which is interesting, banks opening up to new customers at this point in time. That's basically the priorities that you're seeing right now.
Steve,
yeah,
we have a couple of questions about the Paycheck Protection Program. I'll go ahead, Mitch, and then if you guys want to answer a couple of questions about this, that we can do that, or we can save them till the end.
Well, the other comment I was going to make, you said it perfectly. The other comment would be that the idea here was not to have the banks be restrictive. They were to get these loans out. So, it's there, and there have been hiccups and bumps and challenges along the way. But you got to take into perspective what the enormous size of this loan. The SBA put out $349 billion. That is a huge multiple of what they would typically put out in a year. They did in about 2 weeks. So these banks have been asked to do things that they've never been asked to do. And although there's been a lot of frustration out there, and I get it, and I've dealt with a lot of phone calls from friends and borrowers, some of my clients, people that have been referred to me, I've just basically said, go with the flow, be patient. Why has my neighbor gotten money and I haven't? There could be a million reasons why. So you just have to be patient through the process. It's not easy.
But you said something really good, and then Mike will hit the questions that you have, which is, look, the banks are doing the best they can. They've got a massive amount of money to process. They're doing it in a very short period of time in the middle of a pandemic when they're trying to take care of their own people. So, it's everyone's stressed. So have some grace and patience, and don't think evil intent. Think they're trying to figure it out the best they can. So I like that. Mike, you got a couple of questions that you want to shoot us real quick?
We've got a few, but this is a two-part question from one person. Do you know what will happen if at least 75% of the PPP loan is not used for payroll? Will they dock it according to the percentage actually used for payroll, or could the banks use this as an excuse not to forgive any of the funds at all? And the second part of the question, if someone already got PPP funds, will they still be able to get the EIDL advance as long as they don't also use it for payroll, or will it be completely unavailable?
So some of the questions that you're asking that are going to come through on here are going to be questions that are ones that I won't be able to answer necessarily, because some of that hasn't, believe it or not, been resolved yet. They put this program out in such a rush, and they told the banks to get this money out in such a rush that the banks did so without fully understanding all about the forgiveness part of the program and all about the interaction between the EIDL loan and the PPP loan. So your first question, I believe, was what happens if I don't qualify because essentially I haven't met the 75% threshold. My understanding is that there will be a portion of it will be forgiven, not all of it will be forgiven. And that portion which is not forgiven, together with accrued interest, because there's a deferred interest component to the PPP loan, will then be amortized over the 18 months that are left in the program. The bank should not be telling you, you haven't met the standard, the whole thing isn't forgiven, you got to start paying us, whatever the amortization would be at 1% over 18 months. Hello? Hello?
Yeah, sorry, Mitch. I don't know where that sound came from.
That's all right.
Okay.
You're still there. All right. So that answers the first question. The second question had to do with the interaction between the EIDL loan and the PPP loan. And I think it was if I get an EIDL loan you have to use the triple P loan. Maybe this answers the question best for payroll. So if you use the EIDL, to the extent that you use the EIDL loan for payroll, you have to pay back your EIDL loan with triple P loan funds.
Okay. Would you like to take one more question, or would you and
Mike,
Steve like to continue?
Mike, yeah, let's continue. Hold the
Okay.
questions, because I think some of these questions may be knocked out based on the questions that we've already put together. Let's hold a few, and I'll go through these as quickly as possible so we can get some more unique questions towards the end, if that's all right. So, Mitch, I think we've talked about this. Where can people apply? We've kind of talked about where to prioritize. Is there anything that you want to add differently to that? Where can a company apply?
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that would be that a lot of lenders got very entrepreneurial, and some of my dearest friends in this industry, and they accepted applications immediately. Like as soon as this came out, they had a ton of marketing blitz going out, and so they were accepting what I would call very bare bones applications, which about a week later, the SBA came out with its application form and what they needed, and what was originally asked for by the lenders did not match what the SBA ultimately required. So if you yourself or your borrowers only went through the first part of this and provided that to whatever lender you asked for, and you only gave them, some bare essentials like the name of your company, maybe your tax ID number, your address, and how many employees you have, and that's it, and maybe a little bit more, then you've missed a whole step. You have to go back to the lender because there's a whole bunch more that has to be given. You got to provide 941s or other type of substantiating documentation as to what your payroll truly was. You just can't say, well, yeah, it was $100,000 a month times 2.5 is 250,000. Here's my address. Send me my check for 250. You have to provide evidence for that. You also have to provide evidence of a start date. You have to give them a copy of your driver's license. So if you didn't go through any of that, immediately after this call, go back to your lender and have a conversation with them and find out where you are. Unfortunately, I don't know what that will mean relative to the $349 billion that is already spoken for. Some of that may be already for you, but you'll put yourself in a good spot for the next amount of funds that will come out. So that's one thing that I have seen in this process that's maybe been not addressed as much in public as it should have been.
Got it. Very good. Next question really is, does an applicant for the loan program under the Paycheck Protection Program have to borrow from their existing bank, or can they go somewhere else?
Well, we did cover that.
Right.
They can go to any bank they want to. However, there's something called the interim final rules that's come out in 3 different iterations, or one master one and then 2 subsequent ones. And essentially that will become the CFR part of this before the SBA gets their hands on and creates something that they put into their SOP. Standing operating procedures is what guides this business every single day. And they have in there that to the extent there's going to be some new customers, you're going to have Bank Secrecy Act and anti-money laundering due diligence that'll need to be done. So not to beat the dead horse, go to your bank first, whether it's personal or business relationship, before you go to a new bank if you can. That's the way to go.
Great. And this is probably one of the more popular questions people keep asking. What happens if a borrower doesn't have all or some of the portion of its loan under the Paycheck Protection Program forgiven?
That's a great question. So the borrower is obligated to repay the loan in accordance with the terms of the loan. If it doesn't repay it, then to the extent that it hasn't repaid it, this is one of those things that nobody really figured out when the money started coming out. But my understanding is that to the extent that it doesn't qualify, then it just becomes a loan, as opposed to something that's forgiven, and then it's paid back over the 18 months at 1% interest, equal monthly payments. And most people can just crank out whatever that would be. One of the things I would comment on, by the way, is a lot of lenders came to me at the beginning, and this is kind of odd. They would say to me, what are you putting in your promissory notes for P&I, principal and interest? And they wanted to put numbers in there, real numbers, 200,000, 1% interest divided by 18 months to get your math, to put it simply. And I've tried to persuade them you can't do that because many people are going to have all or a good portion of this that's going to be forgiven. So your number is going to be very different 6 months from now than it is today when you made the loan. Also, very, very important, and this is something that a lot of people did not quite realize at the time. Once your loan is funded, you have to spend it. You can't hold it because you've got enough money in your operating account now to carry you until the middle of May, and that's when you're really going to need it for the next 2 months because ... You have to start spending it immediately. It has to be utilized for payroll right out the gate. So after 8 weeks or before the 8 weeks, the bank is supposed to reach out to you and say, okay, Billy Borrower, it's been 8 weeks. I need you to send me all the information that you have, because if you haven't spent it by the 8 weeks, it's not going to be forgiven. So,
oh my gosh, I hope people are paying attention to that one, because I got to tell you right now, there's probably 3 or 4 emails I've gotten from my clients have gotten the triple P loan. And they're like, well, this is great. I'm gonna sit on this money in case I need it. You're actually saying no, it's the exact opposite. Spend it.
They have to spend it right out of the, and it's not, a lot of people going back to Congress and said, you did a one size fits all, but it's not that way. A lot of law firms, listen, in my own business, I'm a transactional guy. My business is going to go down. So I actually also applied for a triple P loan, and I don't have the money yet, full disclosure. Hopefully I'll get it soon. And I'm actually can carry my firm because I have deals that we've been working on that will probably carry me through the month of April before I really begin to feel the stress. I think by that point I will. But if I get my money today or tomorrow, then I got to start spending it. Now the good news is I'll just obviously keep the money in my operating account and then use it after the 8 weeks is over. But who knows what's going to happen in DC between now and then anyway. But that's what I would do, and that's what everybody should do. If I didn't know this, what I just said, then I might have just taken the money, put it in my account, used it when I needed it. And that would have been a bad thing to do.
Yeah, because emotionally you're thinking, well, I'll just spend my money before I use borrowed money. And it's actually the flip side. You want to use the borrowed money first and then use your money as the buffer or backup money. That's really great, Mitch. I really appreciate that. That's very insightful. Next question. And this one you kind of addressed, but we'll just hit it again. What's the interest rate, and when's the interest rate, and when is the interest under a loan under the Paycheck Protection Program payable?
All right, so it's 1%, and that's an interesting thing too, just as a little bit of a commentary. Initially it was 4%, and then it was 0.5%, and then after the Congress and the President signed it, then it came out, it did give the SBA a little bit of flexibility to come up with a number. So it came up with 1%. And the reason it came up with 1% was because the banks went back and said, we can't work with a half a point. You got to give us something else, because if this becomes something that does go beyond the forgiveness period, 1% at least gives me the ability to make something on this so that I can pay my staff for processing and servicing this loan for those 18 months. So that's a little history, which I think is kind of interesting to know about the bank lobby that was part of all this. And just if you didn't know it, trust me, there's 20 different lobbies, if not more, pushing on every single thing that's done in this program as it comes flying out the door. So essentially it is 1%. It's deferred for 6 months. The part that's deferred gets accrued. And then if it hasn't been forgiven, or to the extent it hasn't been forgiven, then it gets payable over the 18 months. And by the way, just more commentary, some of these questions may seem to be fundamental and obvious to some people that are listening, but not to everybody. So I'm kind of hopeful that there's something here or a lot here for everybody. And I apologize to the extent some of this stuff is redundant.
No. So far, I think it's fantastic. I mean, different people have different levels of understanding of this. So I think hitting it at different levels is perfect, Mitch. I think you're doing great. So next question, what's the relationship, and you talked a little bit about this, between the EIDL program and the Paycheck Protection Program?
Okay, so this is great. This is a very complicated matter. I actually had a client call me today who did not qualify. They were told by their bank, which happens to be a bank I represent periodically, because they were bought out by a private equity firm, a large one. And so there's a whole bunch of, oh God, moral and ethical and legal and social and political and optical things that go on in private equity firms, and whether there's money that is or should be made available to them. And so they actually, the reason I bring them up now is they said, well, if we can't get a loan through the Paycheck Protection Program, can we get an EIDL loan? And the answer is they might be able to do that. So the SBA has had something called a disaster loan program for many, many, many years. And the SBA deals with that directly. The money and the funds go from the SBA to the borrower. The application is made to the SBA. You can go on their website and you can start the process. There's a portal for doing that. They were overwhelmed, needless to say, because the EIDL program came out before the PPP did. And so people were all over that loan and trying to get that loan. The requirements to obtain an EIDL loan are more extensive than that for the PPP loan. They have to show, an applicant does, that they couldn't get credit anywhere else, whereas in the PPP program, they don't. That's used to be a little bit more difficult to do in today's world with banks. I think it's a little bit easier to do. That's kind of called credit elsewhere. And for those people that work in my world, credit elsewhere is a buzzword in the SBA world, because if you can get credit elsewhere, the idea is you shouldn't need to come to the SBA to give you a hand. Okay, so that's that.
Got it.
The EIDL loan is got a maximum of $2 million, whereas the PPP loans have a maximum of $10 million. All right, that's significant for some businesses. To be eligible for an EIDL loan requires that you satisfy a number of employees and annual revenue limits that are established by the SBA that aren't the same under the Payment Protection Program. And the EIDL loan, per one of the earlier slides, has a 30-year payment, and the interest rates are different as well. So that I believe is a pretty good primer on that program.
Got it. And I think you've answered this, and there's one of the questions that came out of one of the questions, which was, can a company apply for both the EIDL and the Paycheck Protection Program?
Yeah, that's we did talk about it. If a company did receive an EIDL loan this year between January 31st and April 30th, April 3rd, I apologize, then you can apply for a PPP loan. If the EIDL was not used for payroll costs, it doesn't affect the program, the company's eligibility to get the triple payment loan. I did mention earlier that if you did use your EIDL loan for payroll and then you get a payment protection loan, then you have to use those funds to pay back the EIDL loan, or you can combine the two, but you can't have your cake and eat it too, right? You can't double dip for payroll is the point.
Got it. The next question is a great question. It's one that we've been asked and I don't know the answer to, and I'm hoping you can help us out with, which is, may a business obtain a loan under the Paycheck Protection Program if it has already furloughed or terminated employees? This is a tough one. Yeah,
so the answer is yes, you can. But if you start with the premise that getting a payment protection, a Paycheck Protection Program, PPP loan, is the criteria for that is that you take your payroll over the last 12 months and you bundle it all together, and you cut, basically everybody over 100,000 is capped. So you go up to 100,000 for all your employees that are 100 grand, and everybody less than 100 grand, you can actually roll in, other costs and benefits associated with them, which is fine. And you come up with a number. Let's just say that number is $100,000 a month, 1.2 million a year. You multiply that times 2.5, and you get, hey, I qualify for a loan of 250 grand. That's the way it's supposed to work. But if for some reason you furloughed people before you applied for the loan, simple math will be that your number will be less. So if you had, 50 employees and then you let go half of them at the beginning of March, your payroll for March is going to be less and your number will be less.
Got it.
Okay.
Very good.
All
Very
right.
good. Next question. Does the Paycheck Protection Program include any requirements that a business limit increases in compensation to employees or maybe not pay dividends to owners?
Actually, the Payment Protection Program doesn't. The CARES Act does address that, and these essentially you got to act with. Listen, you're not supposed to abuse it. That's what's in the CARES Act, and to the extent that you do, and there's an audit and they find out, then there's going to be some consequences, and that's also in the CARES Act. But one of the things, and it's a shame in a way, a lot of lenders and a lot of borrowers are not complying with common sense and ethics, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I've just kind of seen things. They're being very loosey-goosey with, the rules, because they figure this is so big and the SBA will never, ever have the manpower or woman power to do the audits and everything that they would ultimately need to do. So the program doesn't have that restriction, but the CARES Act does. So I would not encourage anybody to do anything that would increase your payroll unless it was in an ordinary course of business, and even that is questionable. Don't forget, you're talking about 8 weeks here.
Got it. Yeah. So here's the next question, and this is a good one, another good one. So may the proceeds under the loan to the Paycheck Protection Program be used to pay any principal amount towards existing debt of the company?
Okay, so the answer is no, it cannot. There are just a few things, maybe a half a dozen items that the PPP can be used for: payroll costs, costs related to health insurance, commissions, to the extent that commissions are, part of compensation. You can pay interest on mortgage obligations. I mentioned that earlier. You could pay rent, including rent under a lease agreement. You can use it to pay utilities, and you can use it on to refinance EIDL loans that were made, to the extent that those were used for the company for this purpose. So you would have had to have gotten that EIDL loan between January 31st and April 3rd. That's all. So you can't use it for credit card debt and other things that people may be thinking they can use it for.
Got it. Got it. So I made a quick switch. Let me check real quick on something with Mike. Mike, I went ahead and made that adjustment. Did it stop the echoing?
Yeah, it did. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, Mitch. Mike was picking up an echo and was sending me a message that there was an echo. And me being the graceful kind of guy I switched from my speaker to my headset, and then promptly dropped my phone in the process. And I'm lucky I didn't disconnect myself, break the phone, and fall out of my chair all at the same time, being a really graceful guy. Mike, are we still good on your end? Is everything looking good?
Yeah, we're getting in dozens of questions. Some people are asking several. And so for those of you who have more than one question, if you could maybe type them all together, because they're all stacking on top of each other, and I'm having a little difficulty following along. And please type in complete sentences.
So let's do that, Mike. Mitch, is there anything? What I want to do is give people opportunity to go ahead and ask you questions. We've covered about 35 minutes worth of the most common questions. Are you okay, Mitch? Is there anything that you want to add before we open it up for questions from the audience?
Yeah, I wanted to just address one thing, which may actually cover some of these questions that people have. The forgiveness part is going to be one of the hardest things to really kind of wrap your head around, because so many things can happen, just prior to this process, when the time you made the application, and then obviously after you get the loan. So the concept is essentially that the amount that's forgiven, it will be lowered by any reductions that there are in full-time employment, and in situations where salaries and wages fall more than 25%. However, you can mitigate that by rehiring. So if for some reason you, in the first 8 weeks, let people go, you can actually mitigate that unforgivable part by hiring people back to get you to where you need to be. My advice would be to make sure you are speaking to your lender. Stay in touch with your lender. Please just don't take the money and then, go away. I think you'll be very surprised. And also, this is really, really important. Think about the volume of people and businesses, because this money all will have come out within about I think about a 10-day period, maybe 2-week period. I mean, the first loans, we started closing them in our office last Friday. We helped a couple lenders on Thursday. That's a week ago. They're already through all the money, and all that money will probably be out with deals closed because they have to disperse it within 10 days of when they get their loan approval, probably next week. So what do you think is going to happen essentially 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks from now? Everybody is going to be asking the same questions and trying to get their banker on the phone at the same time. So do your homework ahead of time. Try to learn what you can. Speak to your bankers in the next couple, 3, 4 weeks to try to get from them the information that you'll need to give to them so you're prepared when your 8 weeks are up so that you can have your best shot at forgiveness. That's, I think, really good advice for people to take, just knowing the tsunami of crazy that's going to be going on in about 8, 9, 10 weeks.
Yeah, the complexity. Yeah, just the complexity of the regulations that you've talked about and the procedures and everything the bank's got to comply with, and the amount of work that's come through the pipeline, and how much money has been loaned in what you said, basically a 10-day period, is staggering. It's just staggering when you think about that. So yeah, so this is really great. So I just want to make sure I got the facts correct on this, Mitch. So if I hypothetically speaking say, okay, I've got this team member who is not a good fit right now, or I had furloughed, or I had let go, as long as I replace that person, probably as immediately, I still probably will fall under the loan forgiveness process. But the thing for me to do is be in communication with my banker to the extent I can get my banker on the phone and talk it through with them. Is really the bottom line there. Is that?
Yeah. You should be able to. You shouldn't have to keep a person who's not a good employee. Just know that if you go from 10 to 9, and ultimately that's going to affect the portion of your loan that would be forgiven. So you can now here's the reality, and I think I said this earlier in the call. If not, I said it to somebody on an earlier call. I think I actually may have said this to you, Steve, before the call started. I had a person that contacted me and said, so I have a restaurant, and let me get this straight. I can't even open my restaurant. I had 16 employees, and I have 4 now because I'm doing takeout. If I apply for this and I apply with the 16 employees, I have to rehire them for 8 weeks and then not hire them because I don't have a business necessarily in 8 weeks. If I don't, and I don't even need them now because I got nothing for them to do.
Yeah.
Am I supposed to just pay these people to do nothing for 8 weeks? And the answer is yes, that's what you're supposed to do.
Wow.
And it's the government's way to get money into the hands of the citizens of our country so that they can hopefully use it properly by, paying bills and, paying, for health care for themselves and paying for, fundamental, food and stuff that they need to live on, not to go and, run around and use it on extravagant clothing and things like that.
Yeah.
So the answer is yes.
Yeah,
You do. You pay them.
Yeah, I mean, philosophically, one of the lawyers who's a dear friend of mine, been a client for 20 years, called me and said this is probably the most innovative government program he's ever seen. Just the purpose and the philosophy behind it's pretty intense. So, Mike,
it's awesome.
Yeah, it really is. It's pretty amazing. Michael, let's go ahead and, to the extent that you can interpret the questions, let's go ahead and ask Mitch a few questions, please.
Okay. And again, there are several. If we don't get to all of them, folks, even at the end of the session, I'll compile all the questions and get them to our panelists, and we'll put together a document for the video replay page that you can go back to.
I just want to be fair to Mitch, though, Mike. Yeah. Sorry. So you guys got a shot at Mitch for the next 25 minutes. This doesn't mean that because Mitch did a favor to the company and to the community, means that Mitch is going to be giving free legal advice to 500
Exactly. Yeah.
So let's be clear about that.
Okay.
If you've got a question, submit it. Mike's not promising that you get free shots at Mitch, and Mitch is going to be taking phone calls. Mitch is so busy. If you want to hire Mitch, that's different. But let's be fair to Mitch about this. So go ahead, Mitch.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so this first question is, if I receive 1.5 million PPP, but only use 750,000 for payroll and 250,000 for other forgivable rent, is the 1 million forgivable, or can I just repay the remaining 500,000?
All right, so they got 1.5. They used 750 for payroll, and they used 25,000.
2,500. I'm sorry, 2,500.
250,000 essentially. All right, so you have to use 75% of your PPP loan for payroll to have it be forgiven. The devil's in the details as to what that essentially means. So just to do the math real quick, if you've got 1.5 million, 75% of 1.5 million is a little bit under what, 1.2 million? 80% would be 1.2 million, so about 1.1 and change. So you can use 25% of the 1.5 million for the other things that I laid out in our chat. You know, the interest on a mortgage and compensation in ways other than straight salary and for paying your rent. But to the extent you don't use it for that, it is not forgivable. And to the extent you don't use what you use for the payroll that you have, my understanding is that is also not going to be forgivable. So you're going to end up paying, you're going to have to pay that money back over 18 months. So you might be looking at, you know, we're going to have, you know, about $800,000, $1 million, roughly almost, you know, $800,000 payable back with 1% interest over 18 months.
That's interesting.
That would be
so if you're
my
not,
guess.
Yeah, that's really great, Mitch. Thank you. So if you're not in compliance with the 75% rule on the forgiveness, you're probably looking at paying the whole thing back. Is what you're saying.
You may be. There's the most, right. You have to use 75. You have to use 75% towards payroll. There may be some mitigating circumstances where you can't, but you have to show them where you spent the money. So when you go back to the bank, for example, and you say, okay, I took $1.5 million, I didn't need the other $500,000. I don't need, can I pay it back now? There isn't anything that I've seen so far that says you can't just pay them back that $500,000 right then and there. But to the extent that you used part of that money for something you ought not to, then I think you are jeopardizing some of the forgiveness that's in the loan, because you're not supposed to use it for something else. I think the forgiveness and I think the flexibility will come that you didn't, will come from the fact that you were not able to use the 75% because you didn't have the staff to use it on, not because you chose to use it on ineligible things. That's, I think, where you're going to have a problem in that example.
Got it. Very good. All right, Mike, what's your next one? Thank you, Mitch. That's
sure. This is two questions from the same person. Is the relevant period for accounting the 60 days immediately following the funding of the PPP? And the second part of the question is, a big portion of the amount I received from the funded PPP loan was attributable to retirement fund that I have for my employees, but the vast majority of that funding occurs at the end of the year. How do I spend the money so that I don't have unused PPP monies?
All right, so the second question is easy, and that's easy because the answer is I just don't know. Again, not every set of facts has been thought of relative to the program. That's a question I think you probably should go back to ask your lender. I have not had that question asked before. Everything I've ever dealt with has been for payroll for people right now. But here's maybe the better way to answer that. If I think that through for a second. When you applied for the loan, you were only allowed to give a certain amount of money. You were only eligible to be given a certain amount of money towards deferred comp and 401k. So I'm not sure how you would have gotten so much money on a loan that was so heavy in 401k and not for current payroll expenses. I don't understand how that went through. My experience has been anything but that.
Yeah, so far, the questioner responded that his lender said that they have no clue either. So there's a lot of Okay.
Well, you're in good company, Rich. We're
yeah, right.
The lender's clueless too. We're not sure how that one came down.
But, next question. I applied immediately through Bank of America. My application is still pending. When you say the funds have been spent, does that mean my application will not be processed, and should I expect no money?
That is the $349 billion question. So my understanding is that the 349 is what I'll call spoken for. And I got a whole bunch of emails right before this call started, so I haven't had a chance to kind of dive in and see what all that meant. But we all heard about this, if you're in the industry, that this was going to happen. Some of my clients were telling me they expected it to happen yesterday, midday. Apparently it happened this morning as of 10:30, 11 o'clock, give or take. So to answer your question, you have to go back to your lender. And by the way, with a big bank like Bank of America, that may be a challenge. The numbers that they said they were going through was just huge. The big guys, there's positives and negatives about using big and small banks to do this. But if you can reach them and they can give you the following answer, what you need to find out is how far along in the process were you? The money spoken for in the following manner. The bank takes your application and goes through a couple different portals to get what's called an SBA or E-Tran number. Then they take the E-Tran number, they use that to produce loan documents and then close the deal and then fund the deal. If your bank never got you an E-Tran number, then you're probably going to miss out on the 349. Okay. If your bank got you an E-Tran number, then you should be good.
Yeah, you're slotted. If you've got the E-Tran number, it's probably the money spoken for more than likely in the pipeline, for lack of a better word.
All right.
Correct. And so and just to editorialize on that for a little bit. So in the deals that my firm is closing right now, we are closing for a few banks some PPP loans, and we've had to teach some of the banks how to rethink because banks are super conservative and they're just getting stuff in and they don't know what to do with it all. This is interesting because everybody on the firm, on this call, I suspect, is a lawyer and it will appreciate this. So historically, when you go to a bank and a bank takes your application, you have to prove everything to the bank. And if you've ever gotten commercial bank loans, you know how painful that can be in three different ways. What money you make, the size of your firm, when you started, you name it, you got to prove it. The bank will ask you questions. And it's up to the bank to do its due diligence to ascertain that what the borrower told the bank is the truth, that it's accurate. That's lending in general, and that's absolutely SBA lending. That's one of the hard things about doing these deals.
We have a question related to that. Somebody wants to know if you get the loan, how will the SBA know how the money was spent? Because if you're combining it with your operating account, should you create a separate account for this loan money so they
That's
know
a great question. So that's something you almost have to ask yourself, because the burden's going to be on the borrower. To finish the thought, which will take me to answer your question, Steve, or Mike, whoever asked that one, I don't remember. But so the banks do not have to, for this program, in order to get it out fast, the SBA and the federal government said, okay, banks, we're taking off the handcuffs. You do not have to do the normal set of due diligence, especially if it's a customer of your bank. If it's not, the BSA, which is the Bank Secrecy Act, and the money laundering acts are going to be diluted a little bit so that even those people can get funds faster, but you don't have to go and double and triple check everything. In fact, you don't even have to single check certain things in this program. So, it's literally garbage in, garbage out. So I would fully expect that there will be major problems with this program down the road, to the extent of billions of dollars, because of the looseness of that going on here. And I think everybody knows that. But the hope is that the damage done will be far less than the benefits that come out of the program. To answer the question you just raised on this, the burden will be on you to show the bank, so the bank can go to the SBA and say, okay, well, Susie borrower did do everything right, and this loan should be forgiven. And the bank it will have, I believe, the ability to forgive that loan on behalf of the SBA. They just have to substantiate why it was forgiven. So if you can't show that to the bank, some banks are probably going to, again, be just as loose and say, good enough for me, but some banks are going to be more diligent about it. And so the burden will be on you to show them that you used the money in the manner that it was intended to be used and required to be used.
Okay. This one is it's got several questions combined from one person, so do your best to answer what you can here. What are some of the best practices you can recommend to ensure that the PPP loan is fully forgivable? I don't quite trust the banks, and I suspect they'll do all they can not to forgive funds when they can get away with it. What happens if you do use the PPP funds for a non-approved expense? Do you know whether eligibility for PPP funds or forgiveness of the PPP funds will be effective if employees are also going to get some unemployment benefits to compensate for the docked hours? Is there anything in general we should be aware of regarding the interaction between PPP and unemployment insurance?
Wow. There's so much in there. All right. So,
yeah. And that's not all the question, but I'll stop there.
I'll go with, what is that? LIFO, last in, first out. All right. So you are hiring back these people. When they're hired back, my gut and everything in my life experience tells me, and my understanding, and I'm not an expert in this, is that they're not allowed to collect unemployment insurance. So there should not be a time that they collect unemployment insurance and they also receive payment from the employer from PPP loans. So that hopefully addresses that question. And if they get, and listen, and as an employer, you hire them back, you put them on your payroll, you pay them. I think if you do that, you've met what you need to do. The first part of that question was, what are just some suggestions on doing this properly? When I get my loan, what I'm going to do is, I'm probably not going to set up a separate account, but I'm going to be incredibly focused and detailed, and have the people of my staff be focused and detailed as to what the payroll is. And we run payroll here, twice a month. Some people do every 2 weeks. Everybody's got a different way of doing it, every weekly. So if you get the funds, you're going to have to kind of figure out, if you're in an in-between, period, if, like, for example, if it's every 2 weeks and you get them, 8 days into that 2 week period, how that kind of jives, because the 8 weeks will take you 3 days into the 8th or 9th period down the road, right, to get that paid. So you're going to have to really track that. And I think if you have all your, copies of the stubs that you have, and whatever kind of payroll service that you use, you can work that part out. It should be since, like I said, you've only got 5 or 6 things that you can use this for. One is payroll, In mortgage interest should be easy to show. Your rent should be easy to show. And if you've paid back part of the EIDL loan, that should be easy to show too. The challenge will be relative to the to your payroll and how because it probably isn't going to line up perfectly. I know there were four other parts of that question. I got to tell you, I don't remember all of what they were.
They were asking for
I
best
need help with
practices
that.
and such, but I'm going to move on to the next one because I see another payroll related question.
Okay.
We received our funds for PPP on Tuesday, and payroll was run as usual on Wednesday. Our 56 days is up on June 9th, and payroll will have to run on May 31st and again on June 15th. So do we prorate our payroll, or do all the payrolls run, including the payroll, the day after we got the money count?
This is exactly what I just said.
Mm-hmm.
I would speak to my payroll company and see if they can help me do the math and tell them, look, I got a PPP loan. This is what I'm using it for. And this is, and I need your help relative because it doesn't line up perfectly. And so I think if you'll be able to show that, and you probably will be able to show all the in-between payrolls very easily. And then on the last payroll, a portion of those funds were used for that. Remember, most people are going to operate in good faith and want to show the bank what they need to show. So the bank will say it's okay and it could be forgiven. I think if you give enough information about this to the bank, that you can show that for that last one, 3 out of the, I guess, 14 days, or maybe it was 3 working days out of 10 working days in it, we're covered by this money this way. I think you'll be okay with that. Oh, and somebody in the earlier question had said, I don't trust banks. I think they're going to do, I do recall this. I think they're going to do everything they can not to give this their blessing that this is in fact favorable, so that they could collect 1% interest and get this money paid back over a period of time. I wouldn't worry so much about that. The banks really, really, really don't want this. They want it done with. They'd rather have it be all forgivable, quite frankly, in a way. The banks are making money. Some of you probably don't know this, but if you read the act at all, the banks are actually getting paid by the SBA to do these loans. And I would encourage you to read the act so that you can wrap your head around the fact that the banks, although there's a lot of I'll call it altruism and good faith and goodwill in what they're doing with this. The banks are doing this, and my bank clients will probably throw stones at me for this, but it's pretty much out there. The banks are doing this for a number of reasons. One of them is and this is Mitch Fogel. I should say the opinions of Mitch Fogel do not reflect the opinions of Atticus or anybody else, blah, 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 blah. So I took care of that for you, Steve, already. Your all disclaimers are done. All right, so the banks are doing this to get money out because it's the right thing to do. They're doing it because the federal government basically said, banks, you got to do this, you need to do it. But they're also doing it for retention purposes and business development purposes. Because if you need this money and you go to your bank and say, hey, bank, I need this money, I need you to help. And the bank says, sorry, we're not doing this program. Your next door neighbor, face mask on and all, is going to say, okay, hey, I just got my money. Well, my bank said they're not doing it. Who did you use? Well, I used Bank of America or some other bank. You're going to literally go to Bank of America, and they're going to have you set up a bank account there. And the bank that wouldn't service you is going to lose a business customer. And the banks don't want to do that. That's the first thing. That's the second thing. The third thing is the business development part. The banks are very eager to take business away from banks that are unwilling to do this, because that's how they build up their customer base and their deposit base. So they will offer this program, and hopefully you will take the carrot and come to that bank, and you'll open your account there and spend many, many, many years banking with them and live happily ever after. Sorry to your other bank that was there for you before who didn't do the PPP program, but this is a whole new world, and this is what's going on. So the banks have retention, business development, good faith, and humanitarian reasons for doing this stuff as well. But they are, in fact, getting compensated by the government to get the monies out to you. One other good point I want to make right now, you are not allowed to charge the borrower anything by third parties, nor is the bank allowed to charge them. So if $250 is your amount, $250 is the amount you get. This isn't like a typical loan where on the closing statement there's, closing expenses relative to getting that loan, including bank's counsel's fees. And also, one thing I'll add, in Florida, we have something called documentary stamp taxes on promissory notes at 35 cents per 100. There was a question in Florida about, that would be coming out of the proceeds from a loan, a PPP loan. The governor of Florida suspended that relative to PPP loans about a week or so ago. In your state, your governors may have done the same if you have a similar tax that goes on debt like we do here in Florida. Does that answer a bunch of questions?
That's absolutely fantastic. So a couple things. Mitch, thank you. Before I give you a formal thank you, if you're with us on this webinar today, book your calendar for next week for the 21st. At noon, we're going to do a webinar on really how to manage your firm in a virtual environment. And this is not operating virtually. We did that about a week to 10 days ago, but this is basically how to work virtually. This is how to really manage your firm virtually. I'll be doing it. It's basically strategies to stay focused at a crazy time, some of the things that we're teaching in the Dominate Your Market program. So if you're interested, come and attend that. And everybody on the call, if you get a chance, reach out to Mitch and connect with him via LinkedIn. Mitch, I noticed that you haven't updated your AVO profile, because I was going to tell everybody to go update a huge recommendation on AVO. So go update your AVO profile so all of your friends can say that. If this was valuable to you, you guys don't hesitate to send Mitch a thank you. Don't hesitate to send him a thank you card, gift certificate from Amazon, Starbucks, whatever it is that helps
You're very funny
through this crazy period. And Mitch, thanks, man. I really appreciate taking the time. I really appreciate you sharing wisdom. You never have to disclaim anything. You're part of the Atticus family, so we live and die together. So Mitch, thank you, brother. Really appreciate the hard work. And with everybody, Mike, thank you. Everyone, we're going to have this posted probably in about 24 hours if you want to listen to it again. And if you need Mitch, my request is hire Mitch. Don't, take advantage of Mitch. That would be my request.
Yeah.
So Mitch, anything you want to say before we wrap up?
I would just offer wish everybody the best. Stay healthy, be safe, be smart. There's a lot of websites you can go on. You could probably get some of your questions answered without too much diligence in doing that. Your lender is a great resource as well. And I hope that this has been helpful to everybody, at least to some extent. I mean, if you walked out of this with a few nuggets that you can take with you and help yourself and help your clients, then it was worth your hour. So thanks for joining us.
I know I did, Mitch. I'm really grateful, really grateful. So thank you, everybody. We're going to bring this to a close. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe and look forward to talking to you soon. Bye.
All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.